Hey there, Neighborhood Church. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today for Church at Home. Christmas is right around the corner, and we're super excited to invite you to our Christmas Eve outdoor services on Thursday, December 24th at 4 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. Come celebrate with candlelit carols, live music, fun surprises for kids and families, and plenty of holiday cheer. And if you're not able to join us in person, we'll also be streaming a very special Christmas Eve episode of Church at Home at the same time. So no matter how you join us, we can't wait to celebrate Christmas with you this year. One more quick announcement. After Christmas Eve, we will be going to online-only gatherings for 2 weeks. Check out Church at Home streaming on all our channels on Sunday, December 27th and January 3rd. Then we'll be back in person for our outdoor services on Sunday, January 10th. Hey, thanks so much to all of you who continue to give to the mission of Neighborhood Church. Because of your generosity this month, we've been able to be for Visalia in so many different ways. The Christmas store, Christmas light spectacular, daily Advent content, none of this would exist without you. So thank you. There's 2 ways you can give today. You can head to ncvisalia.com/give or text NC to 77977. Again, thank you so much for investing in the mission of Neighborhood Church. And now, let's head into our teaching time as we continue our Advent series.
Well, good morning, Neighborhood Church. Hope you're doing well. Hey, we're nearing the end of a season within the Christian church known as Advent. See, the Christian church created a calendar within the calendar as a way of telling, learning, and reliving the story of Jesus. And there are 4 weeks in the Advent season that lead us to Jesus' birth on that first Christmas morning. And each week of Advent carries with it a bit of a theme word, and they are hope, peace, joy, and love. And one of the ways the Christian church has traditionally celebrated Advent is by lighting a candle each week. There are 5 candles, one for each of those 4 theme words, and then the center candle, which represents Jesus. Now, you may be asking, why candles? Well, the flame of the candle serves as a reminder that Jesus is the light of the world. And where did we get that idea? Well, a man named John, who is arguably Jesus' best friend, poetically described Jesus this way. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Now, this is John's way of talking about Jesus, that Jesus is the light that shines in the darkness. And as hard as darkness has tried to put it out, to overwhelm it, to seize it, to imprison it, to surround it, to understand it, as hard as it seems, the world and culture have tried to blow out this light. Darkness has not and will not overcome the light that is Jesus. So, Christians light candles as a reminder that 2,000 years ago, light invaded the world. And what's really interesting is that the biographers of Jesus' life and the early Christians, they called this invasion of light good news. See, a chorus of angels who were responsible for Jesus' birth announcement, they show up, and this is so interesting. They describe Jesus' arrival as good news of great joy for everyone. And really, this is the part that I don't think anybody would have made up or really could have even thought up at the time. Because the world when Jesus was born, not unlike our present reality, was incredibly divided. But the angels were super clear. With the birth of Jesus came good news of great joy. And here's the surprise. It was for all people. That the message of Jesus, now that message, nobody really knew at that time what exactly the message was, but that this message would be good news. And it would spark joy for all people. The Jews, the Gentiles, the Romans, the Samaritans, the Sumerians. I mean, anybody who'd ever lived and whatever had lived, right? And that's awesome, right? But here's my question. And we always want to be question askers. We always want to be people who challenge and think. So here's the question for this morning. If all of what I just said is true, that if Jesus is this great news, this good news, if it's such good news, here's the question. Why the resistance? I mean, people don't really resist good news, do they? I mean, when you hear good news, we always hope it's true. We may find out it's not true, but we certainly hope it's true. Whenever we hear good news, we lean in. And if people lean into good news, why isn't Why isn't it that everybody in the world, why isn't it that everybody in our community, why isn't it that everybody in our nation, why aren't they leaning in, hoping that the message of Jesus is true? Why resist this good news if it's actually good news, right? And even if they decide at the end of the day it's not true, why just say no? I mean, why resist? In fact, you may not know this. The original version of the good news was actually called the gospel in English. And it comes from the Old English word Godspell. And that simply means good story, right? The Jesus story is a good story. It's a good story that carries with it good news for all the people. And the story caught on, right? Jesus and the claims of Jesus, they caught on. Because when you hear something you consider good news, you lean in even before you know it's true or before you determine it's false. But initially, you lean in. And one of the things, in fact, maybe the thing that breaks my heart the most about really this generation is that so many people are leaning away from the message of Christianity because somehow they've come to the conclusion it's not good news. And you know what? It's not their fault. Although the American Christian church, I think, likes to blame them, right? But in fact, if you're one of these people, it's not your fault. Because you bumped into, ran into, did business with, went to school with, were raised by some people who carried a version of the faith, a version of Christianity, a version of the message of Jesus. And you determined somewhere along the way that this is not good news and you don't even care if it is true, right? This is not good news and I don't want to live my life this way. That breaks my heart. And at Neighborhood, listen, we're far from perfect, but we certainly do our very best as a faith community and as individuals to live in such a way that the good news is, well, good news. Because the original news, the initial news, it was good and it was compelling and it changed the world. And I just believe it still can and it still should. So this morning what I'd like to do is I want to take us back to the initial news. I want to answer another question this morning. What made the good news so good? What made the good news so good? Now, I want to answer this question, what made the good news so good, by giving you what I believe are the three most beautiful words strung together in the English language. So listen, because this is a really, really big deal, and if you miss everything else, I mean, that's fine, just don't miss this. Here are the three most beautiful words in the English language. God is love. God is love? Okay, great, Forrest, but I thought we were just talking about Jesus and he's good news. Well, it's true, we were talking about Jesus, but for Christians, you got to know Jesus is what God looks like. God is like Jesus. God has always been like Jesus. There has never been a time when God was not like Jesus. God is not this sadistic monster who hates sinners and dangles them over a fiery pit. No, God is love, and we know that God is love because Jesus is God's show and tell. And when we look at the life of Jesus, well, we see a life of love. You know, we had a former guest speaker here at Neighborhood Church. His name was Brian Zahn. And he loves to talk about this way. He says, if the mystery of God is a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, the picture on the cover of the box is the face of Jesus. Listen, if you've ever wondered what God is really like, it's really more simple than you think. Just look at Jesus. If you have a question about God, Jesus is your answer. If it's true about Jesus, it's true about God. If it's not true of Jesus, it's not true of God. There was a pastor from the first century, and we have one of his sermons. And in the sermon, he wrote these words. The Son, speaking of Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory and, listen, the exact representation of his being. Right? Christians believe that God wanted us to know with certainty what he was like. So he sent Jesus. This is, in fact, the story of Christmas, that God sent a someone, Jesus, to stand on our side of reality, to serve as our point of reference, to show us by how he lived and tell us through what he said exactly what God is like. I'm sure you're familiar with the popular Christian song, O come, Emmanuel. Well, Emmanuel is the Hebrew word which means God with us, right? Listen, God couldn't say all he wanted to say in the form of a book, so he said it in the form of a human life, Jesus. Jesus is what God has to say. And all of this is important because it means we can say with confidence that God is love because we've seen it in Jesus. I love how the author David Benner talks about this. He writes, the story of Jesus is the story of love personified. We miss the point when we simply try to do what he tells us to do. And we miss the point when we merely try to follow the pattern of his life. His life points us back to his own source. His life is intelligible only when it is understood, listen, as the personification of divine love. In other words, Jesus is what love looks like in a body. Jesus doesn't just teach us about love, he shows us what true love looks like. Jesus' story is first and foremost about the love of God for every single one of us. It's stunning, beautiful, expansive love, and it's for everybody, everywhere. This is the good story that carries good news for everyone. The creator of the universe is pure, unconditional love. And here's where the news gets really, really good. We are the ones who are loved. We're the recipients of this stunning, beautiful, expansive, unconditional love. You know that same John who talked about Jesus being light said this, "But anyone who does not love does not know God." Listen, for God is love. We know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love. God is love. And all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. See, John wants us to know that soaring above everything else the Bible has to say about God is the statement, God is love. Now, I don't think there are many people who believe in any sort of God that would disagree with the statement that God is love. But I do think many people would try to qualify the statement. Yes, God is love, but he's also just and holy and righteous, and there's God's wrath, right? And we start listing all these other things. But here's the thing, and this is really, really important to understand. Love is not just one of the attributes of God alongside all the others. Love is the essence of all the attributes of God. God is love. That's who he is. And this is a really, really big deal. Those angels who came announcing the birth of Jesus as good news of great joy, this was also new news for the world, right? Humanity didn't always know that God is love. In fact, more than 1,000 years before John wrote the phrase, God is love, a man named Moses asked for God's name, and he was told, I am who I am. That's all he got. And listen, it's true, God is who God is. But now in Jesus, we know exactly who God is. God is love. And this is the good news. This is what makes the story so good. And I'm so sorry if that's been distorted for you in any way. I really am. But I hope you can now see it for what it is. It's good news for everyone. You know, it's interesting. John, who talked about Jesus being light in darkness and who penned the words, God is love, he wrote one of the surviving biographies we have of Jesus' life. And in it, it's interesting, he doesn't talk about himself by name. Rather, John refers to himself simply as the one whom Jesus loved. And I used to think that was a bit arrogant. Like, who would write that? Like, well, I'm the one that Jesus loves, as if he doesn't love anybody else, or maybe he loves me more than he loves you. But I've recently realized John isn't being arrogant. He isn't comparing himself to other people when he talks about himself as the one whom Jesus loved. Rather, this is John describing how he felt when he was around Jesus, loved. When John writes that he's the one whom Jesus loved, he's describing how he related to Jesus, how he experienced Jesus. Listen, imagine the love of the divine shaping your identity to the point that you don't even call yourself by your name, rather just by how well you're loved by Jesus. In fact, let's try a little thought experiment for a moment. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to just for a moment imagine God thinking about you. What do you assume God feels when you come to mind? Is it disappointment? Is it anger? Is it indifference? Is it sorrow? But here's what I want you to know. Whatever word popped into your head, right? If you thought of anything other than the word love, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Because what is most true about you, right? About who you are, is that when God thinks of you, his thoughts are only shaped by love. Speaking of love, I love how the author Brennan Manning talks about God's love for us. He says, if you took the love of all the best mothers and fathers who ever lived, think about that for a moment. All the goodness, kindness, patience, fidelity, wisdom, tenderness, strength, and love, and united all of those virtues in one person, that person would only be a faint shadow of the love and mercy in the heart of God for you and me. Today, friends, we light the love candle because today we remember that God is love and that first Christmas morning, love showed up on planet Earth in the form of Jesus, the baby, right? And this is good news. And listen, our response to this kind of love, it's really simple. It's just to surrender to it. Allow it to be what defines you. Allow it to be the biggest influence shaping your decisions. Allow it to be what determines your response to others. Now, I will say this. There's so much to be said about the idea of surrendering to God's love that we really can't get into this morning. But I very strongly recommend David Benner, who I quoted this morning, his book, Surrender to Love, if you're interested in going deeper on this journey. But for today, I just want to close by praying a prayer for you that a man named Paul prayed for his friends nearly 2,000 years ago. And I pray, Neighborhood Church, that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. I've prayed that prayer for you. Now I dare you to pray it for yourself. Dare to believe that this is God's prayer for you, and dare to make this love yours and allow it to become the foundation of your identity. I love you all. Merry Christmas.